Around the tail end of my trip with my girlfriend back in January, I want to say like the final week of the trip, like the last 7 days, thereabouts, was just me being sick and her caring for me while I was sick. And I remember being a little frustrated with the fact that my body just suddenly broke down on me like that and allowed for me to get sick in a circumstance where I wanted nothing more than to cherish every minute of this time with her and to cherish it in such a way as to facilitate only the most meaningful moments with her. However, nature had different plans for me, but it did end up sort of working out in our favor because, as the old saying goes, in sickness and through health, it was a point where I was in sickness and she she cared for me. And so it brought us a lot closer together to have me get sick. And in particular, as sick as I got, like my throat felt as though it was going to be closing up at any moment. I mean, getting things down was significantly, and I mean significantly more difficult than it was before. My heart was beating out of my chest just all the time. My sense of smell, my sense of taste gone. I would be having dizzy spells. I was throwing up. My fever was through the roof. It was not a pretty sight. Not to mention the congestion was so severe that without decongestants, I could not breathe out of my nose. I had to breathe through my mouth, which is a fairly common occurrence for me when I get either the flu or COVID. But it turned out this was COVID. I got COVID for the third time, and before the pro vaxxer crowd jumps into my comments section, I've actually been vaxxed and boosted. I got COVID the first time with the double shot and the immunity thereafter because it had been about 2 weeks since no, it was more than 2 weeks after I got my second dose. I got sick, and I got sick for 2.5 weeks. And at some point, it became so difficult for me to breathe that I almost had to go to the hospital, which would have been just a terrible thing because I was in Germany at the time and I did not want to leech off of another country's healthcare system like that. So I did not intend on going to the hospital, even if it had become so severe that I actually had to. I had I had an objection to it, but I mean, with all truth in mind, like being as candid as I can be here, I also felt kind of invincible. So it wasn't, like a an entirely moral objection to leeching off of their socialized healthcare system. Like, who fucking cares? It's not my country, it's not my tax dollars. That was really only a series of considerations I could make when I felt literally fucking invincible, despite everything about my body and the way I was reacting telling me things to the contrary. I almost had to go to the hospital, but I managed to come out on the other end alright. And then I get boosted, and sometime after that, everybody in my house gets COVID. And this was a few months after I got it the first time. I get it a second time, and I'm only sick for 3 days, thanks to the prior illness and this booster shot. So I thought I was all good. I thought I was home free when it came to this virus. But of course, it continues to mutate, And certain mutations of it are more severe, certain ones are more likely to survive in humans while also being easier to fight. It kind of depends. There's also waning immunity with the vaccine, as well as the natural immunity you get from having had it one time or two times over. That wanes over time as well. So there are some questions about the efficacy of the treatments we have and also of natural immunity itself. But here I was getting it a third time after not having COVID for, a while. I hadn't had it for, geez, what would it have been, about 2 years at that point? No, it was more than a year though. Um, yeah, because the last time I got it was literally right at the beginning of the prior year, so it was just a little over a year. Um, so it makes sense that after that much time had passed, I would get it again. It was only a matter of time. What I didn't expect was to get that severely ill because, that last week of our trip, I was really doing bad as far as the illness was concerned. But then I get home and I have to be sick on a plane. I have to be sick in various waiting areas in these airports, either waiting 12, I think it was ultimately 15 hours on my dad to come and get me, on all of these other, delays that occurred. And then, I get home and I am sick as a dog. Like, I'm completely tied to the couch. Like, I'm fucking glued to it. That's where I was sleeping. And I still have this severity of symptoms that only seems to continue getting worse. So, for 2.5 weeks, I was sick, and it seemed as though there was no exit in sight, no hope in sight, that I was not coming out on the other end of that anytime soon. And then, miraculously, after 2.5 weeks, it goes away. But what I notice is, oh yeah, I didn't even mention how severe the headaches were, by the way, when I was initially describing the symptoms I had. The headaches were like insanely bad, protruding through my entire head, reverberating throughout my body. Like, the the severity of the pain was unparalleled. Like, it was something out of this world, unbelievable. Uh, you had never seen anything like that. Like, I can't even use hyperbole here. It um it it was bad. But after about 2.5 weeks, I think a little over, I get better. And it takes me just a few days, like 3 or 4 days of not being sick, just to get sick again. And I was sick for 2.5 weeks again. Um, and this is all, by the way, after not having recovered my taste. My sense of smell was still relatively tattered and in pieces. It began to recuperate a little bit. Like, I could start to see things reminiscent of smells that I remembered, but they weren't exactly the same. It was so subdued, the smells that I would encounter, that they really could not be called the smells that I knew in the past. And from there on, I began to think that perhaps these things would be permanent. or perhaps they would sort themselves out after an extended period of time. I thought it would be a while. I also had brain fog and general malaise after being sick, where like I just felt like I had no energy whatsoever, and I found immense trouble in getting up, not to mention immense difficulty in thinking at all. Like, I struggled to find words and to ascertain what exactly I meant to say in regards to a thought I was having. So I would speak about these things in a stuttery and hurried, but also pretty slow fashion. And what the end result of that was ended up it ended up being kind of a shit show. Like I just didn't sound like myself. And about 3 4 days later, I get sick again. This time I have no idea what it is. I don't I don't end up thinking it's COVID this time because I just had that. I thought maybe I got bronchitis or pneumonia or a bacterial infection of some kind. I didn't know what it was, but I end up being sick for 2.5 weeks again. The main difference being this time, I was so dizzy that I could not stand up for like any amount of time. I remember waking up with an extremely sore throat and a stuffed nose, breathing out of my mouth. Once again, I woke up that way, and with my heart beating out of my chest, and I was like, what the fuck's going on? So I get up and I try to scurry my way into the living room. And on the way, I trip over myself multiple times, having to grab onto walls and the like. And I just barely make it to the couch and fall onto the couch to sleep there or to be around my family so they could tend to my needs or just recognize what was going on with me in the first place because I didn't fucking know. And for over 2 weeks, I was so dizzy that I could not stand up for 20, 30 seconds at a time. And that was on a really good day. That was when I was closer to recovering. I like I was feeling dizzy while I was laying down. And this was in addition to these protruding, pounding headaches, essentially migraines that I described before. This was in addition to a sore throat that was worse than the one that I had with the prior infection of COVID. And so, like, the one saving grace was the fact that I did not have the anywhere near as severe of congestion that time around. I had it pretty bad on the first day, as I described earlier, but from there on, like, I could breathe with relative ease and I did not need to employ decongestants, which I already did not want to do because you're not supposed to take those things for an extended period of time. It's really bad for your heart to do that. So even if I needed them, I didn't plan on taking them. But thank God that that was not as bad as it was when I had COVID, not anywhere near. But all of this other stuff was way worse. The loss of smell, taste, the dizziness, the nausea, the headaches. It was all really bad, and I was like desperately trying to figure out what was going on because I thought maybe I got pneumonia from the prior infection, or something bacteria related. And I remember texting one of my best friends about this, and she was telling me, like, you need to go to a hospital, you need to go see a doctor. And I remember telling her, like, oh, I'll get through it, I'll find a way, and so forth. Um, and she was really emphatically encouraging me to go get help of some kind. And by the time I started actually heeding her calls, taking them seriously, I was already on the tail end of the illness. So I came to think that I didn't need any significant input from doctors. And prior to that, when I was in much more severe stages of the illness, I was thinking to myself that to visit a doctor would be tantamount to admitting weakness, admitting defeat. And the way I saw it was, if I can use medicines as little as possible, and if I'm not taking advantage of antivirals or antibiotics, then my immune system will actually be stronger the next time around when I get sick. This was the logic that I had, being the pilgrim versus the lab leak and the subsequent fallout of said lab leak, whatever the hell I got afterwards. Um, and of course, this culminated in me spending like a month of my life, over a month of my life sick. But that was my logic. I thought, if I seek help, if I try to get a doctor on board with whatever's going on here, then next time around I'll be weaker, I'll be less prepared. And at the same time, I kind of liked the pain. I kind of liked the fact that I was in so much pain and that I was in this physically arduous situation because it forced me to confront the difficult reality of that pain. And I saw that almost as though stats were going up in a video game. Like, if I were in an RPG and I had a build, and I, at the beginning of my game, decided to level up each individual stat, that would necessarily mean that the points would not be distributed in such a way as to allow for you to be maxed out on level one, right? Simply because there wouldn't be enough. And so the way I saw it was, well, my autoimmune functioning stat, as well as my tolerance to physical pain stat, and also psychological pain stat, are being leveled up by this grinding that I'm experiencing here. Really, I'm grinding through this illness. And I saw that as an essential challenge for me to respond to future pain and future hardship in a way that is calmer, more reasonable, easier for me to process and go through, and so on. Um, and I think I was right with that. Um, I think I was right with the insinuation that something like antibiotics would make me weaker. I I like the fact that I live in a society where they're an option, because I think having more options is always going to be better. But personally, I would rather not take the option because it feels like I'm robbing myself of a challenge that could in turn lead me to experience the world with more of an intuitive acknowledgement of its transient nature, and more cognizance of the fact that these things are so temporal. Like, if you have to go through physical pain for that long and mental pain for that long, you're going to come away from it when you do feel better, way more cognizant of how transient and temporal all of this is. And I think that's really valuable. Like, I think the less that you allow yourself to have those experiences, the more you're weakening yourself, the more you're depriving yourself of those essential reminders that allow you to get through life in a more comfortable and stable manner. And ultimately, I'm all about that emotional stability. And cultivating that is one of the most important things to me. And I see experiencing pain just one of the many ways that that is cultivated. So I wanted to experience the pain from whatever I got. And that's exactly what I did. And I've come away from it now, and my taste for the most part is back. My smell, that's a little more questionable. It's recovered to an extent, not entirely, but now I'm just hanging out. It seems like all of that all of that's done for. I mean, my taste definitely isn't as strong as it used to be. It feels more subdued. I I don't know why I said it was exactly the same. It's definitely more subdued, but it's there, and I think it'll probably come back in full swing over time. I think it just takes time, but I don't have like post illness, post COVID depression or anything like that. I've been exceedingly motivated, and in most days, I've been in a good mood. There's been a few days where I've been having PTSD flashbacks and, started thinking in more of a negative direction as a result of that. But I was able to rein in those thoughts and to rein in myself in response to them. So, with those outlying exceptions out of the way, most days I've been feeling pretty good. So, I think whatever that bug I caught the second time after the COVID was, it didn't have a lasting effect. I think the COVID isn't having a lasting effect except in those two areas I mentioned. Um, and the brain fog is entirely eradicated. I don't feel as sharp as I could be, although that's probably due to other unrelated factors. But I I definitely feel like I'm capable of thought and focus, staying on track. I read a lot every day. Every day I'm reading, and I'm able to stay on task with that focus and understand what it is that I'm reading and compartmentalize it in a way that allows me to take broader lessons from the literature that may not be literally stated in the text, something more underlying that I derive from both the text and my own thoughts. So I definitely would not say that brain fog is there or that some wider cognitive decline is there. Perhaps it is, and it's only viewable on a brain scan or something, but if it is there, as far as my life pragmatically is concerned, I don't fucking see it. So I think I've successfully bested this beast. I suppose we all just have to stay tuned to see whether or not I truly have. Perhaps some wacky shit is gonna happen, and I find out that I have like a new form of cancer or some new wacko disease simply because I was the pilgrim versus this lab leak. I mean, who fucking knows? Like the world. I feel like the world is revolving um, in the wrong direction. Like I feel like it's spinning out of control, and we're all just sort of here for the ride right now. Like you got these novel diseases coming left and right, and we struggle to understand the long-term impact of them on people because the people who actually have had a long-term impact from them are in the minority. And so the economic weight required to study these things that needs to be behind those studies is simply not there because it's not a large enough portion of the population to affect the broader economy at large. And therefore, these people who are affected in the long term by something like COVID are simply not being attended to. And I I think that's a problem that's going to become more apparent as the years go by, and then hopefully something is going to be done about it. But the simple fact is, we don't know what is going on with this thing. Like, we are not playing with a full deck, and we could be throwing a hell of a lot more resources at this thing, but we aren't. Um, I know when I was sick, there were some moments there when I I really thought that it could be the end of me. I mean, when you're chained to a bed or a couch like that, and you feel like you can't get things down, when you're constantly dizzy, when no matter how many OTC medications you throw at it, you still have this protruding headache. It can be pretty scary. And as it progresses and continues to progress, when you're 2 weeks in and it still feels like it's getting worse, that can be pretty scary. When you have long term effects after it's gone, that can be pretty scary. And so, something needs to be done about these bugs that are getting around. But as to whether or not it will be done in time, I strongly, strongly doubt that.